And today, we'll look at God, the possessor of all, looking at Abram and Lot, Abraham separating from Lot, maybe having the same Lot, in the story that we know very well. And God's going to continue to emphasize his power, his might, his possession, and his faithfulness to Abram as they're kind of continuing to move through life. And as Abram here kind of interacts and has some dealings with his very, very selfish nephew Lot, God kind of continues to teach lessons, continues to show things that are going on, and continues to see God's faithfulness to Abram because, of course, of the promise and covenant that he made with him. We're also going to see a guy named Melchizedek today, a little bit of a mysterious figure who was the king of Sodom at the time, and some of the encounters that kind of went on there too. And a few other things that we're going to kind of look at today as well.
It shows it on the screen, but it's not showing it up there.
The beginning of this wanted me to make you all start off by giving me your best wide-eyed looks. I don't think you do that. Pippa's got a good one. If you get a chance to show it to you today, she's got a good wide-eyed look. She looks a surprise from the phone ring. It's really a good one. But Lot, as we're going to see today, has this moment, right? This wide-eyed moment in dealing in his life. And there's a huge opportunity for him up front to have this really big gain, to increase his wealth, and so on and so forth. And he sees the opportunity, and he's probably thinking of all the possibilities, and he has this big wide-eyed moment of all these things I can do with all this fortune. He jumps on it. Abram, though, on the other hand, could have had the same things, but had his eyes placed somewhere else. And looking at the distinction between where Lot's eyes were as opposed to where Abram's eyes were able to see and understand that God, who is the possessor of all the stuff that Lot thought he could get, is actually the one where we should be focusing our eyes to, in our attention and in our affection as well. What are a couple things that might make you make this same face? A really good cross in the header finish, Pastor Rob, yeah. Anything else? What makes you make this face? Great job opportunity? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When it gives you a brand new car? Yeah, really nice, definitely. Right? Kind of go on. All those things kind of make this space. When was the last time you had one of these moments? You're going to say it out loud. When was the last time you had one of these excited, wide-eyed moments? I had one on Friday. I had a wide-eyed moment on Friday. Not a good one. A wide-eyed moment. When did your wide-eyed moment turn out to be not a potato story? I've got that. This was me. This was me on Friday. I'm in chemistry class, and I've taken my kids into the lab to show them some things, and we were doing experiments. I was doing experiments to show the kids what chemistry is all about, trying to get them excited about it. And one of the experiments that I had done, my chemistry teacher did to me, did it to us in high school, we did it in my college chemistry class. I had done this experiment probably 100 times. You all probably have done it as well. You take a little bit of Germ-X, put it in your hand, and you take a lighter, and you can just spark right over the top of it. And when you spark it catches in your hand. Then you smack it, and it goes out. And it just shows the properties of alcohol and water mixtures and how things can kind of burn and not cause any problems. So I had done it all day long, and the kid thought it was cool. I did some other stuff too, visually, stuff changing colors in front of them. All the kids thought it was cool. In my last class, and had a couple kids that wanted to do the experiment after I had done it, and as I had done it other times. And then I said, does anybody else want to try this before we move back over to the classroom? And one of my football players, a good kid, I said, yeah, I've actually done it before, Coach. Well, let me do it. I'd like to do it again. For sure. So I walked over, took the stuff, sprinkled it on his hand out, pulled the sleeves up just in case something bad happened. And we sparked it, and I smacked it, and it didn't go out. And then he took his hand and kind of locked it down real quick, and then it went out. So I thought, okay, that was weird. But then he showed me his hand, and it was burnt pretty good. We ended up spending Friday in the hospital with him. He had a couple blisters on the back of his hand, and he's good now. But I had this wide-eyed moment because I thought, this is the 100th time I've done this is not good. But he's fine now, good to go. And actually, when his mom showed up, I thought, no, she's going to be really, really upset. But she kind of giggled about it and said, this is probably saving him from something a lot worse down the line in the week or so. Who knows if this is just accidents happen, which is true. But I had this wide-eyed moment. But as God is always, His providential, His care is great. He's going to take care of the whole situation, which could have been a bad one, but it turned out okay. But I had this same thing. Oh no, what am I going to do? As we're going to see with Lot here in a second, kind of the other side of that. And towards the end of this, Lot kind of having this, oh no, kind of what should I have done, what I shouldn't have done. But both accounts that we're going to see studied in a few chapters here share the same notable feature. And God did not enter the account as a player in this scenario until it was close to the end. The timing serves to highlight that Abram's decision was based on what he knew about God and his continual growing knowledge and understanding of how God was actively changing his life as he kind of lived through some of these scenarios. So last week we saw Abram in a not so good spot, but God kind of giving him some providential care and faith and showing him faith through this. We're going to see Abram kind of doing a little more of the right stuff today, and then God continuing to bless him as well. So let's start in chapter 13, and we're going to read down through the first 13 verses, just to kind of get the setup for all this that is going on. And we see here, first of all, a description of some of the wealth here that Abram gained because of the mistake that happened in Egypt and kind of moving forward. All right? So, first 13 verses, let's read down through this. We'll kind of jump into this lesson. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the south. And Abram, which was very rich in cattle and silver and in gold, and he went on his journeys from south even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai, unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first, and there Abram called on the name of the Lord. And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanites and the Perizzites dwelled then in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered. Every chose him all the plain of Jordan. And Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves, the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and he pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So chapter 13 here opens up with this description of the wealth that Abraham had gained in Egypt. We see that there in verse 2, and Abram was rich in cattle and silver and gold. All those things came from Pharaoh. The account then turns, we see Abram returning to the place between Ai and Bethel, okay, where he had previously, as he had journeyed south of Egypt, had stopped and built an altar to God. Right? Verse 3, we see that. And he journeyed from the south even to Bethel, so it's kind of heading back up, in the place where his tent had been there in the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. Now, there's the reason this verse 3 is there. His return to this specific location shows and helps build the anticipation here that Abram is going to act similarly, is going to act obediently, and be humble when he first entered into the land that we saw over in chapter 12. Right? We saw him moving through, building altars, thanking God, worshiping God, being obedient, being humble like he was supposed to. Instead of being more self-driven in his decisions, like we saw in the last part of chapter 12. Okay, so we see a contrast here. We see good Abram chapter 12 at the beginning, not so good Abram chapter 12 at the end. The beginning of chapter 13, he's kind of learned his lesson, we could say, in a roundabout way. And he's back to being obedient and going back and doing the things he should have been doing all along. Okay? Now, if you look at verse 4, and we read verse 4, how would you describe the person and the characteristics of that person in verse 4? And to the place of the altar where he made there at first, and Abram called on the name of the Lord. What are some of the characteristics here you would describe this person in verse 4? Knows the Lord's in charge, which means that he's dependent on God. Yes, he's being dependent on God. What else? Anything else? Priorities. He understands the importance now of being humble. Okay, so dependent on God. He's being humble. And I'm looking for one more thing. What else? Thankful. Say thankful. Yes, and he's being thankful, right? He's being thankful to God for essentially giving him these things that are before him. Okay, so we see a man here in verse 4, that is dependent on God, who's humble and very, very thankful, and being very much a servant to God, okay, at this point. Now, Lot, on the other hand, the description that we have of Lot is noticeably different from the description that we have in Abram. Okay, so if we get to verse 5, it gives us the description of Lot that says, and Lot went also, which went with Abram, and had flocks and herds and tents, and the land not able to bear all of them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. So we see that Lot here in verse 5 also had gathered in quite a bit of wealth himself, okay, had managed to reap basically the reward from Abram. Okay, and being around Abram and being kindred of Abram, I was able to get some of the reward and some of the blessing as well. The fact here that Lot had accumulated such great possession points out that this whole time he's been along for the ride with Abram and has benefited from it financially as well. Okay, and the fact that Lot and his herdsman and his estate is hanging around and is beginning to build some problems for both he and Abraham because of just the massive stuff that they had. Okay, that they couldn't stay in the same place, couldn't do the same things together because of just the amount of things. It was going to develop this crisis between these two relatives. Okay, now we won't flip back over, but in the first 3 verses of chapter 12. To whom did God promise all these things? To Abram, right? Did he promise them to Lot? No, he didn't. Okay, he promised them specifically to Abram, the promise of having all these things and the land had not yet been fully realized yet Abram and Lot were now living in a land with all of these things that they had, that the land was being possessed or owned by somebody else. Okay, the Canaanites that were in the land complicated this Abram-Lot situation. It further complicated everything else that was going on as well. Okay, Abram and Lot had this growing contingent of people, this growing contingent of livestock. The land didn't have the resource or ability to continue to maintain both of these families. And that, of course, would cause, if Abram's got all his sheep and cattle in the field, and Lot's got all his sheep and cattle in the field, and they've got people working with them, and they only trying to get to one watering hole, right? We can kind of see how this would cause a lot of problems. Okay, this is exactly kind of what was going on. So as we see in verse 7, that the strife between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle, as well, the Canaanites and the Perizzites that were there as well. So we've got more people than just Abraham and Lot in this area vying for all the resources of the land. So you can kind of see why this is getting ready to be a big crisis. Okay, all this problem that's kind of going to happen. Let's read down again verses 8, 9, down through 12. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we be brethren. Is it not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. I will take the left hand, and I will go to the right. And if thou wilt go to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld the plain. That was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, comes out of Zoar. Then Lot shows him all the plains of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. They separated themselves one from another, and Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the city of the plain and pitched his tent towards Sodom. So if we read verses 8, 9, all the way down through 12, what is Lot's view on material things? Values greatly material things. What is Abram's view on material things? How do they differ from Lot's? He could care less. He kind of got it, right? At this point in Abram's life, we see him getting it here. He gets it. That the stuff that's here, it's the material possessions, while nice and helpful, and we enjoy. Anybody not enjoy material things? We do. But it's not important to Abram. Because he realizes that his God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, and a little bit of stuff that Lot can see before him is nothing compared to what God actually can bless Abram with. So he gets there. He understands and sees. It's not important to Abram by knowing. And we notice that because he allows Lot to just pick where he wants to go. Wherever you want to go, I'll just go somewhere else because what's there doesn't matter to me. It's irrelevant. So he surrendered the right to Lot. We see Lot making a very, very selfish choice, of course, and Abram just accepting it and not saying anything about it. So we have a contrast here in focuses between Abram and Lot. We see Lot focused on becoming the possessor of all this stuff. The plain of Jordan's plenty of water. Sodom and Gomorrah is a pretty big city here at this point. It's got lots of flashing, it's got neon lights and all the stuff you can kind of imagine. It looks very, very, very enticing. So he thinks, he sees that, I can go be the king of that place or whatever it is, or I can make more money here with my business ventures, or whatever the case may be. He is focusing on becoming the possessor of all. He wants all of it. He wants everything he can get. Absolutely all of it. Abram, on the other hand, we can see his focus is more reflected on not becoming the possessor, but knowing the one who possesses all of these things. Abraham's behavior towards his nephew, Lot, here is pretty remarkable. Lot had been completely dependent on Abraham for many, many, many years now, and had received a whole bunch of material blessings because of his connection with Abram. Okay? Abram, though, at this point, treats Lot as his equal. It's just his nephew. Changed his diapers and all the things that uncles do. Helped him, whatever. But he's treating him here as an equal. And Abram both humbled himself here and elevated Lot in order to keep the peace. So he treats Lot as an equal, humbles himself in his own pride to help keep the peace. Now, the land here that Lot eyeballed and saw and was enticed by was compared to both the Garden of Eden and the land of Egypt, right? If we look at verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered, and everywhere before the Lord, destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, which would be the Garden of Eden, like the land of Egypt that comes out so far. So what he was seeing was likened here to Egypt, which we know Egypt, Nile River, very fertile crescent, all that stuff going on there. Very, very industrial, very, very fortune-filled place, as was, of course, the Garden of Eden. We know from the descriptions in the first part of Genesis what it was like. So Lot sees this, and he has that wide-eyed moment we talked about, right? He's just salivating. He can't, just the possibilities we can make money are endless. Okay? Now, the Nile River in Egypt was an ample water source, brought fruitfulness to the land. Back again where Abram was filled to trust God. So both locations here are filled with temptation and sin. And just like Eden, Egypt, the plain of Jordan, also associated with temptation. Moses here, who is the writer, inserted a future reference, right? Before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, puts that in there for the wickedness. And he also plainly states in verse 13 that the men of Sodom were what? Wicked and sinned before the Lord. So we see some foreshadowing kind of going on here as Moses writes. It talks about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and how evil the men were there. So Lot's choice here is selfish, it's self-indulging, and it's ultimately very, very unwise. Okay, so it's not a smart choice on Lot's behalf. But the temptation was right, the fruit was ripe, and it seemed like things were going to be good. And it's, again, a common lesson for us, but it's one that needs to be stated every chance we get. Sin looks great for a season. Right? That's the great deception of, one of the great deceptions of Satan, is that he takes things that spiritually harm us and makes them look like they're very, very appealing. And most of the time they are. Right? We enjoy the sin. We find, some rest or relaxation or whatever it is in the sin, but eventually that turns to end up being a bad force, right? A harmful force. Sin is okay and satisfactory for a season, but eventually that satiation wears out and we realize that it's not what we should be doing. Same thing here happened a lot. The temptation looked great. And in the immediate future, very helpful and very self-pleasing. Okay? Of course, we know the end result of this. So Lot, again, looking for the possessions. Abram pursued peace above the perceived prosperity that was in front of him. Abraham lived by faith. Lot lived by sight. There's the contrast. Okay? There is the contrast. So we see now Lot looks to get it all, and then Abraham in verses 14 through 18, as Lot is thinking of all these things that are going on, we see how Abraham reacts. Verse 14, and the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land, in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto you. Then Abram removed his tent, and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So now Lot temporarily is out of the picture. He's moved on to where he wanted to go. God shows up, enters into the scene once again to communicate directly with Abram, and once again showing the promises. He puts Abram up, probably up on a hill somewhere where he can see, and tells him to do a 360, right? Look everywhere, turn all the way around and look everywhere. Everything that you can see is yours, and it will be your descendants. I'm going to give it all to you. So he takes him up there and shows him all those things. God here is just simply reaffirming to Abram the promise he has already given him. Okay? Lot's just taken off in what looks to be a much better spot than what Abram is. Maybe Abram's thinking that to himself. Maybe he's thinking, maybe I should let him go. Maybe I should take him. God shows up, reaffirms the faithfulness, reaffirms the promise that he had given him some time before. All that Abram saw will one day belong to him and his descendants. Okay? God also promises in verse 16 that we saw that the descendants become so numerous that it's like the dust of the earth. We'll be able to count all of them. And then he tells him in verse 17 to walk through the land and the length of it and the breadth of it. He's going to give all of it to him. So he directs Abram here to walk everything that he is going to give him. Now, the walking here of the land was not only to give Abram some of the awareness and give him kind of an idea of the land that is promised to him. It's also part of the actual legal requisition that Abram was going to do, or Abram's descendants would one day have. Okay, cultures during this time, cultures that were contemporaneous here to Abram, utilized kind of the same symbols here as the receipt of the land or receipt of kingdom. Okay, anytime a new king or a new ruler conquered a new land or expanded the borders of his city in some way, they were known to circle the walls of the capital cities and tour the boundaries of all their kingdoms. Okay, they would walk out to the outer edge and see all this. It was just kind of the thing that happened during this time. Right, so Abram is legally kind of following through the same thing. He's walking to go see his kingdom. He's walking to go see the borders and see all the land that God is giving to him. Okay? And again, God could give Abram this land for what reason? Because who owned the land? God did. God had the right to give him this land because God owns the land, because God created all of it. Okay? Verse 18 here, the last verse of chapter 13, we see that when Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the land of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar. So we see in verse 18, is Abram here moving his tent to Hebron, and he built an altar there to the Lord. Now, why would Abram, build an altar to the Lord here in Hebron? What's the reasoning? What's the reason for the altar being built?
Lord, purity and that.
Right, yeah, so Abraham offer up a sacrifice and show his means of worshiping God, show his means of continuing to be dedicated to God and his faithfulness, and wanted to give something back to God. Essentially, right, give back to what God has promised. Okay, now, the account here at the end of chapter 13, we have a separation of Abram and Lot, and again, it ends with Lot in this wide-eyed look from the prophet he thinks he can, and Abram with his head more down, building this altar to sacrifice to the Lord. Okay? Abram understands who God is and acts accordingly. And his string of good decisions here continues on down through chapter 14. But we're not going to get into chapter 14 today. We will do that next week when Abram comes in and has to rescue Lot. Okay, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson we had, for seeing the contrast here in Abram and Lot, and how common it is even for us today. And even a lot of times the same struggle that we have, we get those things that are sparkling in front of us and they capture our attention. We kind of see the possibilities of what we can get, what we can gain, and sometimes forget that you're already in control of all these things. And we focus our eyes more on the horizontal than we do on the vertical, and it causes us some problems, just like we're going to see with Lot. David has to come in once we need to kind of take care of him and saving for death, and a lot of bad things going on to them. It's the same thing a lot of times with the help refocus our attention on the things that are important, which are the things. So I pray that you keep our mind on heavenly things, and help us keep our mind on heavenly things, and not only the earthly things that capture our attention a lot of time. But if Pastor Rob comes in the next hour as well, let's use him in a mighty way, Lord, and keep us in to the